We're diving into a fascinating legal objection concerning a commissioner's findings and recommendation related to a CCP Section 473 motion. The hearing is scheduled for August 11, 2026, in Department S54 before Judge Aruna P. Rodrigo.
Yeah, it's a pretty technical but important issue. The respondent objects because the commissioner refused to hear the merits of their motion and instead transferred the matter just based on the Department of Child Support Services, claim that their enforcement case was administratively closed.
Right. And the motion itself is a narrow facial challenge to a default judgment entered way back on March 13, 1998. The core question is whether the substitute service was valid under CCP Section 415.20, which is crucial because it determines if the court had personal jurisdiction before entering default.
Exactly. The respondent argues that the proof of service and declaration of diligence don't establish valid substitute service. Under CCP 415.20, substitute service has to be made at the respondent's dwelling house, usual place of abode, usual place of business, or usual mailing address, excluding P.O. boxes.
And here's the kicker. The judgment roll shows substitute service was allegedly done at an address in Santa Clara County, Northern California. But the documents don't confirm that this address meets the statutory requirements. So this is a facial defect, meaning it's apparent just from the judgment roll itself, no outside evidence needed.
That's a critical point. The commissioner, however, didn't even review the judgment roll or the merits of this facial challenge. Instead, the commissioner transferred the case solely because DCSS said their enforcement case was administratively closed.
Which is problematic because DCSS reframed the issue as just another request to set aside a judgment that had already been denied. But setting aside is a remedy, not the jurisdictional question itself. The real question is whether any prior court actually reviewed the judgment roll and confirmed that substitute service complied with CCP 415.20.
And no such prior order has been identified. So the commissioner's refusal to adjudicate the merits means this fundamental jurisdictional question remains unanswered.
What's also striking is that DCSS, in opposing the motion, only submitted the request for entry of default and the default judgment, both listing Southern California addresses. But they didn't submit or discuss the proof of service and declaration of diligence, which show substitute service allegedly occurred in Northern California.
Right, those omitted documents are essential because they're the only ones that can establish whether substitute service was valid and whether personal jurisdiction was ever acquired before default. Without them, the court can't properly assess jurisdiction.
And DCSS didn't address the constitutional due process issue either, whether the court had personal jurisdiction before entering the default judgment. Instead, they argued that administrative closure of the enforcement case changed the court's jurisdiction and made further review unnecessary.
Which is a flawed argument. Administrative closure can't retroactively create personal jurisdiction or validate a potentially void judgment. The court still has an obligation to determine jurisdiction before declining to consider the motion.
Exactly, because a judgment entered without personal jurisdiction is void, not just voidable. That implicates fundamental due process rights. So the constitutional question remains, did the court acquire personal jurisdiction before entering default?
And since no prior order reviewed the judgment roll to confirm compliance with CCP 415.20, that question has never been adjudicated. The respondent is therefore asking for a de novo review by a judge and a determination on the merits of the facial challenge.
This case really highlights the difference between procedural remedies and the underlying jurisdictional foundation. You can't just jump to remedies like setting aside a judgment without first confirming the court had jurisdiction to act in the first place.
Yeah, it's like a building inspector refusing to inspect a building because the owner says it's no longer in use. The question isn't whether the building should be demolished. That's the remedy. The question is whether the building was ever constructed according to code. That's jurisdiction.
That's a perfect analogy. The court must confirm it had jurisdiction before considering any remedy. And here, the commissioner's acceptance of administrative closure as a jurisdictional bar raises serious questions about the limits of administrative actions versus judicial authority.
Plus, the omission of key documents by DCSS in opposition is a strategic and procedural flaw that seriously undermines their position. It's a reminder that the judgment roll is the primary source for assessing jurisdictional defects in default judgments.
So to sum up, this objection challenges the Commissioner's refusal to hear the merits of a facial challenge to a 1998 default judgment based on defective substitute service. It underscores the constitutional due process stakes involved in personal jurisdiction and the necessity of judicial scrutiny before remedies are considered.
Absolutely. It's a nuanced but critical issue that reinforces the non-negotiable principle that jurisdiction must be established before a court acts. The upcoming hearing will be one to watch for anyone interested in jurisdictional law and procedural safeguards.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll keep an eye on how this develops.
Thanks. Talk soon.